Well, all right. I have only been given 12 minutes, so we're going to dive right in. My story starts pretty much right about here. A blank page and a problem. For most of my life, ever since I was 7 years old, I was supposed to become a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. That was the expectation of my Middle Eastern parents. Those were the three options there that I had. Now, that, of course, has its limitations. That means that you have to go through a lot of schooling, and that means that you have to be incredibly smart. Now, I don't know how smart I am. If I was, neuroscience smart, my mom wanted me to be a neuroscientist. So if she saw that, she would have elbowed me the whole time. It's all right. But in middle school, I came across some incredible mentors and teachers and friends during some really hard times in my family. And I just thought these guys were they became my heroes. And I wanted to be like them. And so I brought my parents into the same room one day and told them, this is going a little bit hairy, okay, sorry, and told them that I wasn't going to become a doctor, a lawyer, engineer. I was going to work with middle school and high school students. At which point they said, why can you not do both? And so, which is a valid point now that I look back. But anyway, so I went and did just that. I worked with middle school and high school students in the west suburbs of Chicago, where I found myself helping build a 40,000 square foot student space called The Hub, and it was an after school space for middle school and high school students. And I got to do some of the same work that those mentors and teachers had done with me. But as I was building that space, I fell in love with this idea of social enterprise, this building businesses and organizations that were both for-profit and for-purpose. And I was trying to figure out how in the world could I learn more. And the common answer was, well, get an MBA. And with being in Chicago, there were several great schools here, namely Northwestern University Chicago, two of the top 5, 10 schools in the country. So I started down that track and thought that that's where I would end up. But the more I looked at the costs, the more I looked at the style of learning, I didn't know if it fit me, and I sure as heck didn't want to get into so much debt where I couldn't navigate what I wanted to do afterwards if I wanted to start something, or if I wanted to maybe do something that didn't have a high salary but had a great social impact. So I kind of went back to the drawing board and thought, okay, if I could start from scratch, how would I design my own education? So I did the next thing the next best thing. I started a blog and a newsletter. And I invited a couple hundred people to subscribe to my newsletter at $10 a month. Now, I know what you're thinking. You got people to give you money? Well, kind of. I convinced them that I would pull off 12 projects in 12 months around the world that were revolved around design, business, and social change. And I would type my papers, my monthly learnings, and share those with them, what I learned, where I was going. And I would also make connections along the way, inviting them to dinners or gatherings. And so for the next 12 months of 2012, which happened to be a leap year, I designed my own master's. Now that led me across the world. I went from a startup in China to a farm in Costa Rica led by rocket scientists who were trying to teach people the ins and outs of organic farming. I found myself at a digital agency that was launching a donation platform and helping them build the pitch deck for that. And I ended up serving Thanksgiving dinner in downtown LA, Skid Row, learning the ins and outs of a massive organization that was serving the poor. Now, this all did two things for me. One was it put me in a position where I was slightly alone, okay? So designing your own education is, you're a little bit of a vagabond, a little bit of a vigilante. What are you, You're traveling around. I would talk to these companies and I would say, can you give me a month? Actually, can you just give me a few days to solve a problem in your space? Now, most of them were like, all right, this kid's gonna have 2 or 3 days, whatever, let him interview my staff. Well, I would scope a project and find something that I could solve, and at the end of that month, pitch it or share that with their company. And so over and over, that's what happened. It was interview, pitch them on an idea, and solve a problem. So it wasn't changing their whole company, it was scoping this thing. Now, along the way, I was finding other people who were wanting to take risks to create change. And that became my way of building a community, was finding these people who were figuring out, well, how would they, or people who were thinking about, could I adopt? Could I start a business this year? Could I learn a new language so I could visit a new culture, be a part of a new community? And so those people started sending me their stories. And at the very end of the year, actually at the very beginning of the year, forgive me, I had said, if you guys share your stories, I'll compile it into an end of the year project, which would be my kind of version of a dissertation. And so that's what we did. We designed a book of stories of all these people who had taken risks to learn and who were learning how to risk. And that became kind of the theme of Leap Year Project. And then finally, I had to figure out, well, how do I design my own graduation? Because, this is my own master's, I had a community now, I had a dissertation. Well, thankfully there was TED Chicago, and so I put a cap and gown on, and on this very stage, I staged my graduation. That was crazy, that was 18 months ago. I know, my parents sat right there. I was looking at them the whole time. My dad was elated. He introduced himself to everyone as the father of the leap year guy. Awesome. So the question then came, how might we establish experience as a credible form of education? It's transformative. I didn't end in debt. In fact, in a lot of cases, I was able to be compensated for some of my work. And I learned a great amount of practical tools around business, around design, around social change. There had to be a way to replicate this. So we started this kind of prototype of a school called Experience Institute, where students, instead of doing 12 experiences in 12 months, which was kind of the Everest of the program, if you will, instead would be doing 3 experiences with companies, organizations, roughly 90 days, 10 to 12 weeks. And they'd have classes peppered in throughout. So start in Chicago in September for 2 weeks, and we'd find a small group of students, this first founding 5, they joined us last September, and they'd meet in Chicago to learn 5 core competencies: storytelling, self-awareness, community building, human-centered design, and storytelling, self-awareness, human-centered design, and community building. And this led us to also figure out how do we redesign all aspects of higher education. We didn't have a massive campus, which if you were to look up university right now, and the first thing you'd see are all these images of beautiful campuses. We didn't have dorms, so what would that look like? We didn't have necessarily full-time instructors, so what does that look like? So everything became a design challenge for us. For campuses, we thought about, okay, well, there are countless office spaces that have extra space, so maybe we can meet with them or meet in their spaces. And companies started giving us space for those kind of quarterly meetups that we were doing. Then for the idea of instructors, we started meeting with people who are practitioners and asking them to give us a day or 2 days of their time to teach us one of those 5 core competencies. And then for dorms, we teamed up with a hostel here in Chicago that started giving us a great rate so that students who were traveling in and out would be able to have a place to stay. It was kind of turning into a mix of kind of Harvard meets the Amazing Race. And along the way, we started building friendships with different universities and institutions. And Stanford was in the middle of doing a project called At Stanford, where they were dissecting 4 parts of higher education: residence life, the library, accreditation, and experiential learning. And they had partners for each of those, and they asked EI to be one of the partners to rethink what experiential learning would look like on campus. Well, in May, just last May, that turned into a final presentation called Stanford 2025, where we were able to share several of our findings and our learnings after a year of studies with them. So that founding class, myself, and several amazing folks from Stanford as well, in which, if you haven't gotten to check that out, you should totally check out Stanford 2025. Super awesome project. And then, of course, there was the actual experiences. So this is April Sitarman's quick telling of what she did in the first year of EI.
When I started my year with Experience Institute, I knew I wanted to become a better designer. I've learned that the best designs succeed when strong ideas are clearly communicated. So, this year, I wanted to get better at developing and expressing ideas. I began by working as a project manager for Dojo, a Chicago-based web design and development agency. For the first time, I had to communicate with clients throughout the entire design process. After gaining valuable experience as a project lead, I felt confident to take on my next term in Seattle. I teamed up with an interdisciplinary team, Studio 7, within the architecture firm NBBJ. I was able to design experiences for civic and corporate projects. I also composed sounds for spaces and helped define the role of sound as a medium in architecture. For my last term, I was back in Chicago with Leo Burnett's Department of Design, doing creative strategy for an arts education campaign. I then joined the architecture firm Leighton Design and arts agency Curmudgeon Group on a public storytelling art installation. Together, we worked on all aspects of the project, from research and diagrams to designing the physical form, audio, and user experience. My undergraduate degrees were in architecture and music. It's not a typical combination, but they were both of my passions. When considering careers, I thought I would have to limit myself to one or the other. This year proved differently. I got to work on projects that let me exercise everything I've learned. I was pushed in new creative directions that stretched me to design in every medium, from graphics to sound to strategy. I don't have to fall into one bucket or the next. Rather, I can show how skills from both worlds make me a better designer and teammate. This year has helped me own my role as a designer and given me creative confidence for going ahead in my career. I've been told, don't study design, study life. But I'd say, don't study it, experience it.
Yeah, right? And so the outcomes of designing their education through experience have been things like creative confidence, creative agency, a process to navigate things that are seemingly gray or white, or the things that don't have a framework yet. Creative output, to have a real-world portfolio, a book of work, and then impact. So seeing not only what they were able to do with and for organizations and companies, but what they were able to do within higher education and what they are doing within higher education as they continue sharing this idea of designing education through experience. Now, at the very end of last year, which actually was just last month, right, so September, they designed their own graduation as well, where they shared 4 discoveries, and they were able to tell of their stories and their learnings. They teamed up with an architecture firm here in Chicago called Canon Design, and then they were able to also welcome the next class of students. So 12 students just joined us, and we're able to hand them their diplomas on the first day. The diplomas are a piece of wood with the logo cut out, and after each experience are given a token that kind of fills in the diploma, and then at graduation they get the pendant that completes it. So it was an interesting handing of the baton, and the next 12 students have begun, and they're all just nearly all ready to start off into their fall experience. They'll do a spring and a summer one as well, with meetups in between. And obviously, I mean, starting a school is like, I don't know, starting a city or a museum, or I don't know, like, where do you start, right? And so it's been this combination of learning, funding models and thinking about are we a movement and an organization and a business? We've been able to work with different organizations and actually businesses to consult on how they generate kind of this, and foster a community of curiosity, just like CIW has, but community of learning. And scale is another one. How do 1,000 people or 2,000 people do Experience Institute or design their education through experience? Now, what's been interesting is to think less about how do we have that many people come through EI here, and more so how do we create this process? So the discoveries of helping people start with intention, thinking about don't declare a mission, don't declare a major, but start by declaring a mission. So for example, Debbie Patterson, who's one of our new students, is interested in UX and healthcare. So one of her experiences that she just begun is working alongside IDEO and their Open IDEO challenge for designing solutions or administrating the challenge for the Ebola virus and finding ways to create solutions for that. So for her to be in a position where she's able to learn about UX and be able to do so in a way that's building her body of work and serve an actual common need. Secondly, to take a risk and not a class, to find things that push you out of a comfort zone. So moving, not that classes are bad, but more so thinking about what do I actually need to learn that I don't know yet? Not just what's going to fulfill a degree, but what's the thing that's going to push me out of my comfort zone so I learn new skills. For example, Dane Johnson, a writer who was one of our students last year, was in a spot where he had an invitation from an ad agency to work with them for 3 months. And he's like, Victor, I'm really interested in Eastern Orthodoxy, and I'd like to do a writing project on a monastery, and in a monastery. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm the leap year guy. This is a good, but this is, I don't know what to advise him to do. And he decides, he finds a New York Times writer to mentor him, and he goes to New Mexico and works and lives in a monastery during Lent, and writes a paper on this whole project that, and it now has this amazing piece that he's been able to share. The third part is the idea of reflection. That experience needs evaluation. You can't just move through things at 100 miles a minute. That in fact, if you know your story, you'll define your future if you take those moments to look back. And then, a way to do that. There are countless ways each day, month, and year to take chances to look back. April, who I just showed you, used Instagram as a way to reflect in each place she visited, sketching things and showing kind of how she processes cities, and it ended up becoming a piece of her portfolio. And then iteration. So how do we make learning a habit? And in the context of EI Solo, so Joe Burgum was one of our younger students, 20 years old, and was in a position where he just was wanting to learn how great teams work. So he spent time at Red Moon Theater, he spent time at an ad agency, and spent time at an experience design group at an architecture firm. So that idea of iteration has now launched him into a year of studying how, he's from Fargo, North Dakota, and he's wondering about how do I make my city more alive? So he's doing a traveling tour of cold weather cities to see things like Copenhagen. I think he's actually there right now. Studying about what is making Copenhagen come alive. So this process then of intention, action, reflection, iteration isn't just something that can happen here. It's a framework. It's becoming something that anyone, anywhere can begin to execute on and think about in their own context. So I think as I kind of look at what does scale look like for this? Those who design their education, I think will be the ones who design their future. I mean, think about it in this context of design in general, right? 50 years ago, 60 years ago, the computer opened up an entire new type of design where people could design everything from websites to systems to print design. And now there are countless ways to create things without much cost. And you can easily excel at them and learn how to do so. Same thing as with businesses. You used to need, or felt like you needed some sort of great credential to design a business, right? But now, entrepreneurship, anyone can launch a billion-dollar business, and they could do it from their garage. I think this is going to happen with education. I'll end with this. There is a new breed of learner who is realizing they don't need a costly degree to achieve the tools, the networks, and skills to make a valuable contribution to society. By thoughtfully leaning into the countless resources around them, apprenticeships, online courses, personal projects, individuals can design their education. It will take extra attention to detail and an emphasis on telling their stories, but those are increasingly necessary skills. And those who venture to take such a leap will set a lifelong pattern of being inventive, helpful, adaptable, and curious. And they can do so without the crippling debt that comes with higher ed. In fact, in its best form, this will be seen as a credible option for anyone of any age, demographic, or socioeconomic class. From the corners of the inner city to the hallways of our high schools, to workshops and spaces in any industry. So on a systemic level, I propose you find every way to cultivate curiosity on your team and leave a seat at the table for those who are curious and impassioned by what you're doing. And on a personal level, for many of you, the tassel may have been turned, the final school bell may have rung, but what does it mean for you to intentionally learn now? As the pace of change across industry quickens. All of us are finding ourselves at ceilings and at crossroads. If it's time to learn, I'm inviting you to the same call I shared on this stage 18 months ago, to be a student again. Find ways to solve new problems with people who are striving for change, and watch how it shapes you. Watch how it inspires others. Thanks.